Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third live stream in the series JetBrains Academy crafted especially for educators. This is our first summer live stream, and I know that schedules might be busy and outside is very tempting, so thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Julia, and with us is our speaker, experienced software engineer trainer, and an avid rugby fan, Andrew Paul. Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
Before we start, just as usual, a few words about our series. As I said, we crafted this space for those who are passionate about and involved in modern education. Tutors, professors, teachers, administrators, managers, this is the place for you. The streams take place once a month, and if you haven't seen the previous two, do check them out on our JetBrains Academy YouTube channel. And if you have any questions about today's talk, comment them down below. We will answer them at the end with at the Q&A session. So, yeah, I think that's it from my side. Andrew, I'm giving you the floor.
That's great. Thank you very much, Julia. And thank you to JetBrains for having me. So my name is Andrew. I am a software engineering trainer for a company called Instill. We're based in Belfast, but we're a global firm that's been providing software as a solution to a number of places. And I work in the training department, and we would try and enhance learning in the industry as it is, and we do a lot that way. And what I'm here today to talk to you about is an authentic voice in young professionals. And what I want to do, first of all, is to set some context as to what we've been looking at in where we're working and how we think we can potentially help and encourage you as educators to foster that, to encourage, promote, to grow this idea of an authentic voice, primarily in the context of leadership. So it's not something that was necessarily in the title, but leadership is what we're going to be looking at. And first of all, I want to turn around and say, I've been there and done that. For many of you, you're at the end of a long term, whether it's school or college or university. And for somebody to turn around and say, I've got some ideas for you to change your classroom, it's sort of the, oh, here we go again. And do they not understand what we've been through? And I just want to say, I really appreciate everything you do. And I'm hoping that a lot of the things that I am pointing towards the end of this talk today will be helpful, and in many ways things that you're already doing and maybe just changing the view of it a little bit. So thank you so much, and thank you for having me today. To give the context of this idea of an authentic voice, what we're looking at the moment in the software industry and the companies that we're working with is that here is a software engineer, potentially on a Friday evening. They're just about to go home for the day, but they know that they've just had a promotion and they're going to some form of more senior role on Monday morning. And when it comes to Monday morning, maybe they're a senior engineer, maybe they're a scrum coach, maybe they're a project manager, whatever their new title is, whatever that seniority that they have gained is, the question is, can you spot the difference? And what we found talking to other companies and looking even at our own processes internally is that there's that struggle actually to figure out what's going on and almost a panic when people are trying to figure out what this new role is. Because what typically happens at the moment is that people are working, whether they're graduates or engineers or whatever they are trying to do, they're working for a certain amount of time and then they almost get given a promotion because you've been here for a while. It's time that you moved up. And we're talking to employers, we're talking to other service providers, and we're seeing that that isn't useful. We're talking to the new senior engineers and the experienced old hands, and we're hearing the stories and going, this isn't the way it should be. So we're focusing at the moment at trying to figure out how on earth we can get people more ready for these leadership roles, depending on what they're doing next. And one of the things we're finding a lot is that people haven't found their own voice and they get dropped in this panic, and that's the time that they start to find their voice. But really, is that too late at that point? Is there any way we can encourage that sooner? And we're trying to encourage it from the second that they get their foot in the door and start with a business, whether they're a graduate or somebody just coming through. And what I'm hoping is that at the end of the day, you might be on board with me, you might disagree with me in a few things, but that you might be able to see some things that can transform some of the activities that you do and get your students even more ready for industry and the progression of their careers as that's going. And what I want to show you is this idea of the Dunning-Kruger curve. Now, thank you to Rick Monroe, who posted this on Twitter at the time, now X. And this curve shows a repetitive progression of careers, and you can find on this curve that actually you could go through this cycle many times in a week, a month, a year, or longer, or you can see it as a progression of your entire career. But what we tend to find is that in the first little while that you're maybe there, say as a graduate, you have this zero confidence walking in the door. What am I going into? What am I doing next? And gradually you go, oh, I've got this, I understand it, wow, I've done something amazing, and that's great. And this confidence level really starts to peak, but we don't really have the wisdom that we've developed over time. We don't have that knowledge, that experience, or that judgment to know what happens next. And actually what tends to happen is very quickly something happens that we don't expect. It's not necessarily something bad, but we take it as bad, and we interpret it wrong, and as a result, our confidence gets knocked right back down and generally doesn't build up anywhere near as fast, because what we're doing is realizing that there's a humility there. We're recognizing where we are. But this little trough that appears afterwards is probably where a thing called imposter syndrome kicks in. And it can be really hard for people to turn around and say, I am good enough again. And we can see then that in that curve that comes afterwards, multiple identifiers saying you need to ask for help. It's not too late. Talk to the people around, absorb what's there, listen to what's going on, watch what they're doing, watch how they work with each other, and learn from that. And hopefully, then we get to a point at the top of the peak again where we have that knowledge, that experience, and judgment, and people then start to learn from us. That's sort of the ideal pattern. We'd love to get rid of the first peak and turn that into a steadier curve, but that's what's kind of sort of happening at the moment. And this real idea of imposter syndrome really comes in. Now, having stood in front of lecture theatres, having stood in smaller classrooms, there's always a part of you turns around and goes, is there someone in here that knows more than I do? And you're looking around waiting for that question you can't ask, and I don't know enough, and it just isn't good enough, and it sits there. So we can probably, assuming that you think the same way as me, you probably can empathize with that side of things. And the same thing happens with our graduates, with our engineers, and even with our students. That feeling of, I'm not good enough. Now, I apologize for part of this image. I've generated a lot of this with AI, and some of the prompts have created some interesting connections of letters rather than sensible words. But you can see there that overcast shadow that's lingering, the sad face on the person working, and just the thoughts that are there. I'm not enough. I'm just not good enough. Everyone's smarter than me. And even maybe a notion, hide my errors, don't let people know that I've struggled with something. And we're going to see in a little while why that is so wrong and how we can potentially celebrate that. And in celebrating those things, we're encouraging people to find their voice and start to become leaders in the areas that they are working in. And I really believe that we can support that from much earlier than what we're doing at the moment. I also really believe that the phrase "a born leader" is a terrible phrase. The picture on the right, again AI generated, kind of makes a small mockery. There's nobody just sort of pops out and the doctor goes, "Congratulations, it's a leader." That's not the way it is. There are certain people who maybe have different influences. They maybe have had different experiences where they have naturally become leaders a little bit quicker than what others would. But there's also people that will lead in different ways. And because we all think differently and work differently, well, then we're going to be naturally drawn to different things. There's people we would call leaders because we can empathize and associate with that. And that's really a focus that I want to get across. I don't think that people are born leaders. I think they become leaders. I think that through experience and through sharing, that they are able to lead in their own areas, to enjoy their own things, and have a group of people that they bring with them to enjoy that as well. And really, to be able to do that, they have to be able to, yep, you guessed it, they have to find their own authentic voice. So I guess the question is, how do we foster that? Well, for us to be able to encourage that, to promote it and grow it, we need to get into the mindset of what maybe our students are thinking. And maybe we think this a little bit sometimes as well. Maybe we read a blog and we see this really popular piece of information that's been published. Maybe it's on a website or maybe in a magazine, and we read it and we go, "Oh, I could never do that. I could never know the stuff that they do. I could never get the people following that the way that they're popular, and people just get them." And they write stuff, and it just blows my mind. Maybe they watch people presenting and they say, "Oh, I could never stand at the front confident like that. How do they come across so confident and positive and excited and just talk and not panic? I could never do that." As another thing that gets stuck in their heads. Maybe they've been programming with us for a couple of years as educators in our classrooms, and they are making these small programs that do little bits and pieces, but they go out on their placement year or they see all these projects, maybe in the news or online or roundabouts, and they go, "Whoa, I could never architect something as big as that. I could never go to Apple or Microsoft or any of the big companies and get involved the way those mad people do. I could never do that." And the question is, well, why not? And maybe they just see somebody who's able to go around and talk. Maybe they sit down and they know somebody who's got them through something, and they watch and they go, "I could never do that." And the question really with all of these things is, why not? And that's what I'm hoping to sort of pull out potentially in the next little while. And this is a really unscientific graph. This is just something that I've plotted in Excel to kind of prove the point. But thinking back to that overnight change from software engineer on Friday night to scrum coach or senior role of some sort on Monday morning, what we're finding is at the moment, really, people are being plunged in the deep end and they're being forced to develop some form of leadership style. They're not 100% sure how they communicate with their team, because on Friday they could just chat and it was great. Whereas now on Monday morning, there's a seriousness there. Maybe they haven't been talking to the client. Maybe they've been producing work and any problems have gone to the person that was previously in the senior role. And now they have to go to the client and they have to talk to them. And how does that happen? How does that communication style potentially change? And maybe there's other bits and pieces involved in that role that all require them to think about new things and become leaders in what they are doing. So the purple line is sort of showing that it's like, I'm just getting along, I'm surviving in my job, and oh, I've got my promotion. Sudden spike, I need to learn some stuff, and then for me to get on to the next part, whoa, another big spike, and it doesn't make a huge amount of progress, and we aren't really unlocking the potential of individuals by doing that. Whereas if we can get involved much earlier, much earlier, and try and encourage leadership and people to find their voice and understand how communication in particular can happen in so many different circles in so many different ways, well, then we can have a much steadier growth of leadership, and actually we'll unlock that potential and they'll rise to new heights much sooner. And as somebody working in education, isn't it really our dream that the people in front of us become successful in whatever they do? And secretly you hope they become millionaires, remember who they are, and come back and give you the money, right? So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to encourage leaders, and how are we going to do that? Well, I would try and inspire, possibly first of all, because I think if we look at Stack Overflow as an example, actually we can see where we're potentially going wrong, and something very simple that could potentially help us unlock those authentic voices. So think about Stack Overflow. I'm actually going to drag um, a very popular question onto the screen here. The content of the question doesn't really matter, but it is rated as one of the most popular questions on Stack Overflow. So why is process a sorted array faster than processing an unsorted array? Somebody has asked the question. You can see here, I don't know if you're familiar with Stack Overflow or not, but you can see here that 27,000 people have turned around here and said, this is a really good question, and upvoted it and given it a little bit of positivity to say, yeah, I want to know this. And the interesting thing about it is that when we scroll down a little bit, so all the context, the big question, the initial thoughts, the queries that are there, some follow-ups, there are 25 answers that have been given over time. And the most popular one has 35,000 people who've gone, yeah, I love it. This makes sense. This works for me. I understand this now. 35,000 people. Do you think when the person was answering that question that they were going to be famous to 35,000 people? Possibly not. But here's the thing that saddens me a little bit, and this is the reality of finding that voice where we have to look at our communication a little bit differently. 35,000 people have said, yeah, I love this answer. 27,000 people have said this is a really good question. But 1.9 million people have looked at this page alone. So of the 1.9 million people, only between 30,000-ish people have actually turned around and said, yeah, this is great. How many other people have visited this page, read it and gone, yep, got it now, and moved on? They haven't communicated, they haven't shared and turned around and said, yeah, I actually agree with that. So this person might actually have a bigger following than they even realize. But they had to be brave enough to put it out there in the first place. And scrolling down, when we're looking at this now nearly 12-year-old post, 35,000 people said that was great. Scrolling down beyond the very long first explanation, another 4,500 people thought this was a better one, briefer, some clarity underneath, 3,000. But my favorite one is to scroll the whole way down. You can see I'm scrolling quite a bit here. Is to scroll the whole way down, still going, still going, still going, going, till we get to this answer. And I love the statement at the start. An answer for quick and simple understanding, but read the others above for more details. Someone here has turned around and said, look, there's some really great examples here. There's some really great explanations. But you know what? When I was looking for this wasn't exactly what I was looking for. Actually, I wanted something a little bit briefer, something I could just look at a picture and go, yep, I understand that now, move on. And I don't want all the extra detail and the juiciness that comes with that. I just wanted something a little bit briefer. And this person was brave enough to post it. They labeled it and said, look, I don't expect everybody to want to read this one. But for the 33 people that liked it, and dear knows how many out of the 1.9 million that have read it before, some people have saw benefit of it. And that's key. The key to realizing what our voice is realizing that we do not have to talk to everybody. We talk to the people that we are working with. We talk to the people that we need to bring along with us. And in the case of a Stack Overflow, I don't know how many times I've gone on and I have looked for a solution and I've tried this and I've tried that and those haven't worked. So I tried a different version and I tried a couple of things. And then I realized there was a mix and match option there that I could have made it work. But actually, I didn't turn around and post that. And how many millions of people potentially have come across and had the same problems as I've had and haven't shared it either? Maybe we could have a much more involved community, a much more supportive community, led by a huge number of leaders because people are willing to turn around and talk about it and to share that simple fact that we didn't get it right first time. We had to play about a little bit, and here's the reasons why these other ones didn't work. So part of what I'm going to talk about later is how can we encourage people to share their errors, to share their mistakes, and consequently share their journeys. And it's that willingness to open up and share it. And I think personally, looking at the leaders in industry at the moment, they are nearly all people who at some point have publicly made their mistakes known, shared them, and then people have followed and understood them because they saw the journey that came next. And that is what we need to try and encourage in all aspects of what we're trying to do. So going back potentially, let me get rid of this tab. So going back to those initial I could never do that thoughts, well, why can't you blog? Now, Julia had mentioned that I'm an avid rugby fan. When the World Cup was on there in the summertime, I was thinking about an agile course that I was teaching, and I was thinking about Scrum, and I was sort of going, the metaphor around Scrum is actually really powerful. and I love rugby. So why don't I write an interesting article for me that ties everything together and shows what's going on? And when I wrote it, and I will pop it on the screen here just to prove, it is there. It's not something that most people are going to want to read. Although if you want to find it, you can go and read it. But I knew whenever I was writing it that there's only 500 million rugby fans in the world, and there's about 32 million people working in the IT industry. And the crossover between the rugby fans and the IT industry were probably going to be very, very small. Never mind, taking out the fact that some people just wouldn't care, some people wouldn't have time, and I wasn't pushing to get it out there. But what I was doing was writing about something that I enjoyed and tying the learnings from it to what I was doing. And it was special to me, and that's why I did it. We need to potentially start to encourage our young professionals to tell their stories, because every time they're doing something, even though they'll think, oh, 300 people in the lecture theatre did the same piece of coursework, it doesn't matter the story I went on. Actually, that habit of telling the story, including all the nitty gritty bad stuff that happened, is almost as important, and we can learn as much from what isn't there as what is. Maybe they're going to turn around and say, well, actually, I could never do the presenting side of things. And this is one of my colleagues, Matthew Wilson. Matthew was in Belfast talking at the serverless days the other day. And one of the things I love when Matthew is doing a chat or a presentation is that he will turn around in the first couple of slides and he has a picture of his family. And he introduces himself as a husband and a dad and an engineer in that order. But when you watch Matthew delivering that, you can see a little bit of tension in what he's doing. And when that slide goes up, something in him relaxes and he gets into it and he knows and he finds his groove and away he goes. And I commented that to him the last time I watched him do a talk. And sometimes it's just a matter of finding that little thing, that little quirk that makes what we're doing ours. Let's encourage those little things, and maybe not cheesiness for the sake of cheesiness. I'm not saying that all of us now have to stand up and give presentations that have our family members on the screen. Some of us might hate that and some of us might love it. But there's something where little things like that show our personality. They are our voice coming on and through what we're doing. How can we encourage our students to potentially nurture that idea? We had a group of work experience students in a little while ago, and a couple of my colleagues in the office did a fantastic job taking them and building a solution essentially from scratch. And the thing that I love about the picture that's on the screen now is that there's lots of personalities here. You have people that are up front and we're going, well, you have to do that and you have to do that right now. You've got people at the sides that are sort of repeating and suggesting and looking. And my favorite is the guy at the back with the hoodie who's sitting, looking and thinking. He doesn't need to talk right now, but at some point he's going to turn around and say, but what about? And at that point, his voice is coming through. He's the thinker in the group that's looking at the bigger picture. And you need that mixture in a group. It's encouraging that and saying, yeah, amazing. That's what we're going to use to build our bigger systems. And this is Jason. Jason doesn't know that he's appearing in my presentation today. But Jason, again, is a colleague where I work in Instill. But I never really work directly with Jason. Jason works in a different department and faces different clients. But the thing I love about Jason is that when I go into the office and I meet Jason, I know that it doesn't matter how bad a day I'm having, Jason will be able to turn around and say, the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter, but tell me what's going on. And it doesn't matter what it is, Jason will be able to put you at ease. And best of all, he loves food and he uses that to an advantage. As you can see here, this is us having a pizza day where he's brought in his pizza oven and he's making us all pizza. That's amazing. That's not something that we can quantify or advertise for in a job advert, but that's somebody bringing their personality and their voice in and doing what they can best. So how do we bring all those things together? How are we going to try and figure out how we're going to use these? Well, I think, and I've said this already, actually, I sort of gave it away. I think we can learn as much from what isn't communicated as we learn from what is communicated. In other words, sometimes we're very good at maybe giving a presentation, but what's missing that makes that ours? We're very good at writing reports, but what's missing that's really shining a light on the things that were best for us? Or maybe we're looking at processes and we look at things that went wrong. Well, it was the fact that they didn't communicate to each other. It's the fact that somebody sent an email here and sent a message there and the two didn't link up. We can see that bad communication or people not willing to say things will teach us as much as what they if they had. So what are we going to have to do? Well, first of all, we just got to be our own selves, and in brackets we have to be our own authentic selves. It's really important that we learn who we are. And I'm saying this because I think if you're very early into your educating career, that can be tricky in itself. But then we're trying to encourage our students to turn around and say, well, who are you? And what are you doing? And what do you like? And what's coming through? And encouraging that is really key. And I would say it's even important to ask some of these questions that we're going to look at in the right, and to keep a note. Encourage our students, the people that we're looking after and nursing and growing and fostering, to keep a note of those things so they remember them. You know, what were your ideas? What are you coming up with? People used to joke that I came up with all these mad off the wall ideas that could never happen. If someone said, space travel, I would be going, well, what about time travel? And they go away on, but why? What's going on? And people saying, well, actually, I see what you're saying. Let's bring this back to reality now. What were your ideas? What's your way of thinking? What makes you different? Why did you come up with that thing? What was your story to get to that idea? Tell me about it and keep a note. What concerns you? What annoys you? What worries you? Those things are going to be different for you than they are for anything else. What solutions have you come up with? Why did you go on that journey? Who are you? What do you like? What do you enjoy? What do you not like? And having an idea of what those things are and possibly being willing to reflect on that and write them down will help you and our students as we're going through it to figure out what those things are and figure out what makes us us. So we don't just copy everybody else. We can look back and say, actually, these are things that we want to use for ourselves. And reflection is so important. Reflection will go on a journey. Okay, so we'll start off, and that means we need to be a little bit more self aware. And I say we, our students, need to be a little bit more self aware. We need to know, they need to know what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. And we generally sell that fairly well, don't we? When we're talking about evaluation, give me your strengths and your weaknesses and your opportunities and threats, SWOT analysis, but what are those things? And actually, further than that, what are you getting really passionate about? What do you really enjoy and like, or maybe not like and hate? Because passion can go both ways. But what are those things? What makes you want to get involved? What do you not like? And as you start to reflect on those, you will start to transform. You will start to see yourself grow. That little imposter syndrome will start to get minimized, and you'll start to find your voice. Because if you know what you enjoy and you know what you're good at, you'll have more confidence to talk about those things. And as your confidence starts to grow, you'll be more willing to also turn around and say, well, actually, I'm not so good at this. So I'll put my hand up now. Databases makes me a little bit nervous. I love playing with them. I love fixing them when they're broken, but it scares me a little bit getting them set up. But I don't hide behind that. I state it outright. And I think I get more respect from my peers whenever I say that. And there's other things that I love. And I talk about those things with an equal passion. So that's transforming. But I think that's the key thing. The key thing here is not just having the awareness and going through that reflection, but turning around and saying, let's share it. And that is the scary thing. That is the thing that when we're thinking about those blogs and those presentations and all those other things that we were thinking about earlier, it's the willingness to share. It's that willingness to open up and give. That's scary. But that's the only way that we're really going to transform and then become leaders that are taking that going through. So, talking to our students, we need them to know that they know themselves best and they shouldn't try to be somebody else. They need to be brave enough to share because other people will empathize. There's that person that put they read everything else, but here's a short version on Stack Overflow. 33 people empathized with that. And you can't know everything, so don't you dare try to pretend. Now, our students in front of us, that should be a real life lesson straight away. We're in a room surrounded by people with different backgrounds at the front, hopefully. Imposter syndrome, maybe a professional that should know the key points of what's going on. But we can't know everything, especially in an IT world that's growing and developing at such a rate. So what we want really through this is trying to get this consistency of being ourselves and sharing regularly. And if we can do this, we start to set examples to other people where we're finding who we are and we're being ourselves. We're being brave enough to share what we're experiencing and what we're finding, and other people go, yeah, me too. And then people will start to follow and they will start to copy. So what's important is that we start small and we start from the start. Getting to the point where you've got your promotion and then you find your voice is too late. It needs to be much, much earlier in the process, and we can do it one little step at a time. And this is where I'm wanting to go next. I'm going to talk about leadership and some of the styles, and hopefully how that will help develop voices in our classroom. But this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek quote. So you'll find it in a couple of places. No one's really claimed to say that they said it first. But group projects in school weren't made to teach you teamwork. They were meant to teach you how to deal with the incompetence of your co-workers in the workplace. And I don't know, I've been there and done coursework working as part of a team. I've been there as a lecturer, I've been there as a teacher, and watched teamwork happen, and all the peer reviews and bits and pieces that you do at the end to get those extra few percentage points as part of your coursework. And this sort of takes the Mickey a little bit, where it's turning around saying it teaches you how to deal with incompetence. But the thing that annoys me here is actually, where in our mark scheme does it turn round and say, okay, you're working as part of a team. What did person A want to get out of this module? And when they have set their goals, have they actually met their goals? And think about those students maybe that they've turned around and they said, I just don't get this module, but I like all these other ones. So I'm going to aim for like 80 or 90% in all of these. And I'm just going to scrape a pass in this one, but that'll average me out to a top grade overall anyway. And if they're looking to just pass, well, do their teammates appreciate the fact that they're looking to just pass and the reasons why, and be able to look at that? Because they'll turn around and say incompetence, but if they were more empathetic, they might understand success or changing the focus. And as somebody going into a management role, if you have leadership skills, you'll be able to reflect on that much quicker. So maybe how we're sharing these ideas is great, teamwork, yay. We've been really good at trying to put soft skills into the education sector in our classrooms and building more than just a curriculum of knowledge, but also skills too. But maybe our focus and how we assess and how we're pushing our students into those could be changed ever so slightly. Now, I'm not saying that that is in any way going to be easy. Turning around and saying, what's your target? 40%. Oh, you got 40%. Well done. You're amazing. Full marks from your co-workers. That is not going to be an ideal and easy thing to do. But maybe there's a chance that we can help students to change that way of thinking so that they're not just slating people that they feel didn't contribute the same way as everybody else. And that's what we're going to try and think about in the last part of this as we go through the more practical side. So as I'm going through this, I am saying that these are not all fully baked ideas. Some of them need a little bit more thought and tweaking. Some of them will take very different shapes depending on what your classroom looks like and what you're doing already. But I think a lot of them have potential, and it would be even lovely if after this, if some of you have taken some of these already and have run with them and found things to to reach out and tell me, because I'd love to see a few more, rather than just maybe things that I've done. It's always lovely to share, isn't it? So what I want to do is just to outline leadership, and building into voices then. So maybe how can we encourage people to talk more? How can we encourage people to lead? Well, maybe if we have a no title leadership style where, in where we're working, we can turn around and say, we don't have titles here. So they've obviously got more experience. They've been here for a while, but everybody can talk. And the cheesy pun on this, the only job title here is family member. Um, we're all working together. We're all on the level. What we're encouraging is that everybody can speak up when they need to. Everybody's voices is heard, and we can use that. And that's probably slightly idealistic. It's probably hard in our classroom to make that work, but there's potential. But some of these others might be slightly more interesting. What about a managing up style? So a managing up style will turn around, and you have your manager, and underneath that you have the people that are working as part of that team. And what they do is they listen and they respond to the manager. They get to know them. And rather than the manager demanding things all the time, they start to think the way that their manager does. And they say, right, well, what do we think is going to be needed next? And they anticipate it and they have it ready to go, without being asked, really. And that is where management is being pushed up. The people underneath are saying, well, I can see the vision. I can understand what they're going to want. I'm going to make that work. And that's empathy, and that's listening, and that is planning, and going ahead, and trying to implement something like that could be interesting. If your students really get to know you potentially as a leader of the classroom, well, they might see what comes next. And that is you suggesting managing up. That maybe is already in place, but sharing the side of you've learned to empathize, you've learned to anticipate, that's great. And pushing that positive learning, is maybe something that doesn't happen as much in our classrooms. Maybe we've got a mission control style. I've got this great idea at the top. I'm not sure how it's going to be implemented. I'm going to run it down the ranks. And the people who are doing the groundwork turn around and say, oh, well, you can't do that. That's silly, but you could do this, this, this. And I listen to that and I make it work. These are all interesting. There's layers involved, and it sounds like I'm maybe suggesting that, the educators are going to take on a burden in communicating. I'm not actually saying that at all. What I'm suggesting is that potentially, there are various modules around project management, that are going on, and different things along those lines. Maybe we could get entire different peer groups to interact with each other and have different priorities, different focuses, and we encourage them then to communicate backwards and forwards and credit them accordingly, to what's going on. And that can freak people out because there's baselining, and if this person doesn't pull their weight in this module, does that impact this person in this module? I appreciate that. But how could we potentially encourage these skills? How can we encourage these communications? So we're not just dumping them into industry at the end, and then they're trying to find their feet. Actually, they're so well practiced and versed and used to working together, and talking out and being themselves, that it starts to work that way. And maybe just something like, peer leadership. And this is something we probably use quite a bit already, where one person starts to share knowledge to help somebody nearby. You can imagine that in your classroom where they're sitting and somebody tells the person on their left or right what to do. And those people start to learn and see the benefits. And then they start to go back and go, you did that before. Can you help me a wee bit again? And they start to enjoy that and they learn from it and they build. And then those people either side start to pass on, learn the same way. That's peer leadership. Encouraging that's great. Plagiarism can be tricky. I can appreciate that, in a classroom. But that's these notions of leadership all coming from how we vocalize what we're doing. How can we support and nurture and foster that, in our classrooms? And again, I would expect a lot of this is already happening. It's the next few slides coming up that may be, a little bit more challenging. So really, throughout our leadership, what we want to see is that we're setting an example. And the same thing is happening then as a result. Our voice is coming through because we're explaining what our standards are. And what are my standards compared to your standards? What's acceptable? Where can we see the overlap? Where can we see where we agree on and disagree on? Where can we start to set up a debate and figure out where we land on? And we'll talk about how we could facilitate some of those conversations in a little bit. Looking for consistency, no flakiness. Now, this is what I believe, and I'm sticking with it. It's going back to the idea. If we're going to be authentic in our voice, we have to be willing to listen. Spoiler alert, that's on the next slide. But we have to also be able to say, well, this is who I am, and this is what I enjoy and believe in, what I found. And way back when I said, take some notes, that's what I'm talking about, coming back and our students being able to look and say, well, this is what they agree on. And then how can we have effective communication? How are we communicating and why are we communicating? And we'll see these coming through a little bit more. But what I'm really thinking throughout all of these is that I want to develop in my people empathy. We're coming into this world of AI, computer machine generated bits and pieces. But what about the human side? Do we understand and feel what the other humans are experiencing? And that has to come through. That has to be for the teams that we're working with, the clients that we're coming backwards and forwards to, the businesses that we're working for, where we've got people potentially above us who have different priorities and different reasons that the business is running. And we have to be able to empathize in all those directions, as well as whatever personal stuff that we leave at the office door and we walk in. We have to be able to work with those and bring them through. We need clarity in what we're doing. So how is what we're saying going to be fully understood by whoever comes next? How are we bringing those people on board? Is what we're saying clear? And how are we able to measure that and encourage that? And most importantly, in communication, I think there's too much talking. We have to have a willingness to listen. And other humans matter, and they might be right, is what's key behind that. We have to listen and adapt, not necessarily totally change. We might concede, we might balance, we might rethink a little bit, but that willingness to listen and take on board. So how is this potentially going to impact on our classrooms and helping our young professionals find that authentic voice? Well, here's one that I don't think many people are going to like. I think presentations are not the best option to be used in education. I think there's a lot of modules and bits and pieces where at the end, as almost a conclusion to what you've done, you're going to present your findings. And that's okay. I think, though, we think about computer science and we think about the education sector that we primarily work in, and we stand at the front and we deliver every day and present. But is that what is balanced out in industry? And we think about some of the students that will deliver presentations to us, and this is what this picture is trying to show, where there's too many words on the screen, and they're looking the wrong way, and they're sort of staring, almost reading the slide off. And how are we nurturing that skill? What good is that in them finding their voice? So maybe we could do things differently. I used to request my students would actually write out a script first, and then they would submit the script to me. And then in the early days, certainly that they were with me, I would get them to highlight keywords, and they were only allowed to put those highlighted keywords on the screen. That was maybe changing how they focused on a PowerPoint. And I would say, well, why are you highlighting that word? Why is that significant? And encourage them. I'm not saying that they were wrong. I was saying, well, how are you saying this? Where's your emphasis at in this speech? But what is maybe more interesting is actually, are there better options? So we've found this thing, and what I used to love to do was, and it was painful, but I used to turn around and say, okay, I want you to go and research this, and I want you to go and research that. And what they didn't realize was that in some of the guidance that I had given different groups was that they were researching opposite things. And really what I was hoping to do was to spark some debate very shortly. And rather than getting them to present at the front, talking for 10 minutes, and thank you very much, that's my speech, I was getting them to turn around and say, okay, I found this, this, this. And one of them would turn around and say, well, hang on, I was researching that and that said that was rubbish. So what are you saying about that? And it wasn't easy. I in that stage, I was working with adults of around 15 to 20 people. And it was generally awkward silence to start with. But if you can figure out how to spark that, what you start to see is that passion for something coming through, that fact that they know something deeply. And remember that with any good presentation, whether it's Matthew standing at the front delivering about serverless, or whether it's us standing and doing our modules about the stuff that we know and we've been doing for ages, or somebody at some point in the business that is pitching their idea or pitching what they really want the business to do next, there's a passion there, and that passion doesn't always translate with the knowledge that we're trying to teach. And how can we expect our students to get passionate and excited about delivering when actually that's not where they're at yet? So maybe there's alternatives like a discussion, like a debate, which can get the same information communicated across. It can allow people to start to communicate differently and is more like the communications that they will be having in their workplace later on. And then learning to draw the line when the debate gets too far. That's another thing that was fun whenever it started to happen. Do you have stand-ups in your classroom or in the labs where you're demonstrating? Because it probably won't work in a group of 400 people. But do you turn up and have a stand-up? And remember, people think about stand-ups as being horribly long things. Stand-ups should only be a few minutes. They're brief, they're quick, and they summarize the key things. But by encouraging those, that brevity that we're trying to bring in is also encouraging clarity, which we mentioned before. How am I getting the key points across? And in doing that, I'm encouraging prioritizing and what's important to me right now. Do you see what's happening? So by turning around and saying, let me do a slightly different communication activity instead, what am I bringing out and how's that going to help? And actually, if we're doing that in education, when they get to industry, it's something they're already familiar with. And the people that are already in management roles and looking after the scrums and are trying to get their teams going don't have to spend time coaching them as to how to do that. They already know it. So let's think about stand-ups, and let's then, as a result, if we're all standing, we can listen a little bit more and say, well, actually, I hear you're having a problem. This is not the place for us to discuss the problem, but let me come back to you later and we'll have a chat about that. And that's how we can then facilitate, because that's how a stand-up should work. Do we do that? Some people will and some people won't, but where's the downside, I guess, in this? Here's a personal rant, I guess, almost. But I don't know about you. Some of the emails I used to get from students were terrible. No subject in the subject line. Sorry, I won't be there today. I've got an appointment. Punctuation doesn't appear. They sort of seem to ignore autocorrect. I suppose at least they sent the email. That can be a positive in some cases. But does your department have a policy? Have you turned around and as a group of staff agreed, look, dear student, on day one, if you ever send me an email that doesn't have a subject, don't expect a response. If you ever send me something that doesn't have a greeting, don't expect a response. And that seems a little bit harsh, but if we can encourage and set out standards from day one, well, actually, we're teaching that appreciation that there's different communication styles at different points, and they have to be able to find their professional voice written down in an email. And that's not to say it has to be perfectly written. It doesn't have to be perfectly spelt out. If somebody maybe has a dyslexia that they struggle with writing, that could be a bigger hurdle to try and overcome. But nonetheless, if we have the structure and expectation in place, if they're trying it, we can support that. We can respond to it and say it's great. And even in that, we're not narrowing down authentic voices. We're still encouraging structure and patterns and change in voice tone, but we're not telling them, say, hi, Andrew, hiya, Andrew, greetings, Andrew, good morning, Andrew. They don't have to be strict. We're not trying to narrow down their voice. We're just trying to encourage structure. We're trying to encourage manners that are appropriate to the level of what an email should be. And we're trying to encourage a little bit of empathy. If you talk to me like this, I'll talk back to this, and this is the level we are at. And you'd be surprised how quickly that can deteriorate in the industrial world when we've got direct messages flying backwards and forwards, and then on Friday going into Monday, now they're communicating with a client, and the balance isn't necessarily there. Can we encourage that a little bit more? Reports are interesting. If we look at the Agile Manifesto, I don't know if you ever have, but look it up. It turns around and says that we do prioritize and value the working product over comprehensive documentation. Now it's prioritized. It doesn't say we do the product and we never deliver documentation, but it just says there's more focus on it. And actually in education, because we need to assess, there's a lot of reporting going on. But actually, when does reporting really start to kick in the industrial world? Is that more at a senior level, or do our juniors do that? And can we build up to that a little bit more gradually? And a little bit of comedy around this slide is suggesting that actually there's a lot of different roles in IT, and a lot of different people will communicate the same idea based on what they understand from it. And the joke is that the project is generally very poorly documented. But we're moving away. We're not writing hundreds of Word documents and PDFs. Are you using the likes of a Confluence or a blogging page to help you document those? Or are we doing things in a different way? And really, is reporting the primary way of communication? Or can we share through other methods of getting those voices coming through? We tend to give structure. We can support that, introduction, conclusions, and the middles. We might give headings. But are we encouraging active voices in that, or are we putting people off because they're too scared to write longer things? Can we build that up a little bit more? Could we get more out of somebody writing a blog post or delivering a vlog to camera than maybe what a report can do, and encouraging them to talk about the things that are more important and watch them get excited, and then we can get excited with them. There's where we're maybe starting to think about changing the communication. And one thing that is really interesting to me at the moment, and it's something I've seen throughout my career working in software, is that as a software engineer, I might want to be a master of my software engineering trade, but every customer I go to knows stuff that I don't. So if I'm going to a hospital and I'm talking to doctors and nurses, they have whole degrees and knowledge bases that I could never pretend to understand, but I have to make something for them. I go into them as an apprentice, hence why I've got Alan Sugar here as a cheesy apprentice pun. But that's what I'm thinking about. How does our classroom then reflect that? Is there this thing where we want to become super engineers, and once we do that, we're masters and look at us? Or do we have opportunities where we can reach out more and more to local clients? Maybe we've got charities in the area who need little projects done, and they could provide us with a list of things. And instead of just having coursework 1, coursework 2, coursework 3, and 100 things being produced the same way, maybe we could have a couple of unique projects for different customers, and they mightn't go anywhere. But we're encouraging that idea of, well, I need to know more about your domain. I need to know about your subject area. I need to understand about what you're trying to do so that I can implement software in a better way. And in doing that, we're encouraging empathy. We're encouraging the fact that we are not masters of their trade, and the respect that has to go into that, and the ability to listen and understand a little bit quicker. And all of these things are simple things that I think could help us, if we think about them, change the voices in our rooms and grow them and foster them and make them great faster. One small side note, I guess, is just to mention code. I was reading today that there's a number of graduate roles that feel like they're going to be threatened because they're not coming away from education with other skills like using Git. And if you haven't heard of it, maybe go and look quickly. But here on the screen, I appreciate it's a wee bit small. It doesn't really matter. Is an example called the Gilded Rose, which you can Google. It's on a Git repository. It's a great example of where we would usually refactor and make code better, because this code is horrible. It's ugly. It's repetitive. It's really not well factored at all. And what we could turn around here is the old education thing, which tends to be you must comment your code and comments are great. So if I was to turn around and comment this, I might go from a 65 or 70% to an 85 or 90% mark because I've explained the code. But actually, explaining code without comments, having better written code is going to be better than having the comments. Now that can be convoluted, that can feel a bit strange, but there's a far better way of writing this code. You can possibly see, if I bring my cursor over, I'm checking to see for this sulfurous, and I'm checking again for this sulfurous. I'm seeing repetition. Can I change that where I've got one single check? Can I make that more efficient that way? Can I explain to the user what's going on a little bit better? And the answer 100% is yes here. But how am I going to do that? Well, first of all, I'm going to have to write code. I'm going to have to explain that communication a different way. Anybody that writes an I with me in a loop, I will almost shoot on the spot. I feel that angered about it, because why not explain what that I is? Okay, that is my count. That is my current value. That is my current item. Whatever it is, I just doesn't cut it. Explain more through your code what things are. And do we really need comments if we're writing better code accordingly? We would talk about apologetic comments. It's almost like, yeah, I know this looks complicated, but I couldn't be bothered to make it any clearer. And we're trying to bring that through. But one responsibility that steps up into leadership, which in the coding industry, but doesn't have to be very high up at all, it should be encouraged much lower down, is the idea of a code review. How many times do our students look at a peer's code and say, what are you doing that for? Why have you named that like that? Why do you have so many tabs in there? You're missing the semicolon. I don't like the use of brackets there. Whatever that is, why are we not encouraging that? And that's what a code review comes down and becomes. And we tend to see that as a very senior skill to be trying to bring on board. But it's not. It should be something that we're all willing to do. It's that thing back at the imposter syndrome slide from a while ago, where we're not willing to show our errors. We're not willing to think, how am I going to learn here? A code review will actually encourage us to open up and say, this is what I've done. I am going to welcome feedback. And that feedback might sometimes be telling us we're wrong. It might also say, why have you done it that way? And it's that willingness to go backwards and forwards and maybe debate a little bit what's best if we feel like we're building knowledge. So I'd especially be keen for those of you teaching programming, can we communicate better through our code? Codes at the moment, engineers are spending 60% of their time reading code rather than writing code. If we had better code, we'd have to read it less. And what I would encourage you to do, no matter what it is, find some way to celebrate the good when you find it. So we, for example, in our work, we use Slack for direct messaging. We've got this little plugin that we've created in-house, which gives high fives to people. People go, yeah, they did a great job. So you can see here, Aaron's reaching out to Rory and saying, cheers, Rory, that was really good. And those little simple encouragements will turn around and say, yeah, I enjoy that. I'm starting to get passionate about that. I'm starting to build my confidence. It's not necessarily going to be the 70% or the A pluses that we give in grades and the comments that we put in our feedback. Is there any way we can get other people, those peer reviews, those other bits and pieces, for people to turn around and say, yeah, that was really good. Thank you. Can we encourage that in our classroom? And we might have extracurricular activities, we might have societies, we might have bits and pieces where that naturally happens, but can we formalize that a little bit and deliver it in our classroom in some way? Celebrate the good when we find it. And with all of these little things, what I really want to say is that you, as an educator, as well as our students, have a great voice. There's no harm in reminding each other about it, and there's no harm in then telling our students the same things. The emphasis is that it is your voice. You need to share what you enjoy. You need to find what you're passionate about. Maybe you've written papers. Maybe you're used to putting publications out there. But do people really know what you enjoy? And are students then, are they reflecting that idea? Find your voice. And the world needs to hear it. Don't be afraid to share it. There's 6 billion people out there. If we just carry a tiny percentage of people that say, oh yeah, I agree with that, what is it, not one could still be 60,000 people, something mad. The world needs to hear your voice and our students' voices. And if we can get them to find those voices a little bit sooner, we'll find our industry is going to change, because the leadership and the understanding and the empathy that can carry through the ideas that'll be shared and all the problems that we've been overcoming by ourselves so far will become a community that can get through them together, that can anticipate and appreciate what's going on better, and we can grow and become a better success than ever before, because our educators have fostered that voice and brought it through. It's not a small challenge. I know you're flat out with every other challenge in the world, but please remember to remind your students that they do have a great voice. It is their voice, it's unique, and you and the world really, really want to hear it. Thank you for listening. I hope it's been useful in some way, shape, or form. Julia, I don't know if there's any questions at the moment, but feel free to ask, and I'll take anything that's coming.
Thank you so much. No, there is no. I don't see any questions. I think everybody just. I don't know. Thank you for the talk. I feel like I needed that. To be honest, I needed to hear that, and I start just thinking about a lot of people that I met who, for instance, not from tech background as myself, and they constantly. I feel like a lot of these people, they constantly block their previous experience, everything that is not related to tech. Like, it's not relevant, so I won't use it. I won't base kind of, yeah, myself on it, because, well, I'm focusing on this new industry now. But I think this is a big mistake. I think that
Absolutely.
that's the uniqueness of your experiences, your educations, and everything that you've been through. This is something that brings the new perspective. This is something that is most valuable probably in your work. There's something that you can bring to. So if you probably, I don't know, do you have any comment on that? Probably you met some students like that, or teachers who struggled, or on the opposite, knew how to approach this.
Absolutely. I mean, I can think of, so whenever I used to work for a software company years ago, and there was an attitude change where it was like, right, we're not going to employ software engineers anymore. We're going to employ people with music degrees and art degrees, and that was like weird for me as a junior watching what's going on, but actually realizing that those people were coming in with a different way of thinking, a different background, a different approach, and the amount that I could then learn from those people. And the best thing about it was, for me, was learning the fact that actually it wasn't all about the nerdy geeky things like object oriented programming. Actually, there was a bigger thing going on there, and then me being able to talk about things that I enjoyed rather than feeling under pressure to talk about what the textbook talked about was really important. And what you said there about sort of leaving stuff behind, and that being wrong, absolutely. Every experience we have is valuable in some way, shape, or form. Even so, part of my background is actually in electrical engineering, and I sort of felt like I was leaving that behind. But actually, I've had a few clients recently who have been electronics businesses with a software, and me being able to then communicate in a slightly different domain language as a result, is something that I thought I'd left behind, but actually was able to bring it through, and that's my voice coming through. That's my experience, where maybe other educators in my field wouldn't necessarily have that. So there's value in everything that we've gone through. There's value in everything that we bring to the table, and absolutely don't leave it behind. It's all valuable now.
And I think, yeah, thank you. And I think as educators, we do need to encourage this diversity of interests. And yeah, this is amazing. Thank you. It got me thinking a lot.
And I think even it feels like I'm almost putting a little bit of pressure on some of the education systems, but I think even going younger, that sort of joke about teamwork that we saw earlier too, by the time our students get to us, they should know what teamwork is. So maybe even we need to go earlier in the program to figure out how can we better teach teamwork. So by the time they're getting to us as secondary schools, colleges, universities, that they're actually focusing on interaction rather than just working together, and understanding the relationships there. And then by the time they're coming through, we don't need to worry about it at industry. We're too busy focused on what way we can improve the processes with AI or something. But there's I feel like I'm offloading a little bit onto the education sector, and I'm sorry at that level. But equally, there's no reason why this can't transition lower down as well. And I would imagine there's probably not a primary school teachers or kindergarten teachers listening to this, but there's no reason why it can't even echo down earlier as well.
Thank you so much. Uh, yeah, if you have any questions, I mean, if you come up with any questions after our stream, just feel free to leave them in the comments. We will answer them. That's no problem at all. And I think there will be some questions after that. We just need to all digest and probably rethink our approach a lot. Thank you so much,
No
Andrew. It
problem.
was
And
very
if
nice to
anyone has
meet you.
anything else, and feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I'll answer anything that comes that way too.
Perfect. Thank you. And well, see you on the next one.